In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, another conflict brewing between tech and Washington. Google responds to criticism from President Trump that its search results favor the left. Plus, FireEye is working with big tech to flag state-sponsored misinformation campaigns ahead of the U.S. midterms, tipping off Facebook to meddling by Iran. But what else are they seeing? We'll talk to CEO Kevin Mandia. And China's top ride-hailer Didi says it will put safety ahead of growth after another passenger is allegedly murdered by a driver. How the company can recover from the Delete Didi campaign. But first to our top story. It was just Monday that President Trump railed against social media companies, claiming they are silencing millions of people. Now he's taking aim at Google, tweeting Google search results for Trump news show only the viewing reporting of fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent. Republican, conservative, and fair media is shut out. Illegal? 96% of results on Trump news are from national left-wing media. Very dangerous. Google and others are suppressing voices of conservatives and hiding information and news that is good. They are controlling what we can and cannot see. This is a very serious situation, will be addressed. The president then deleted those tweets, replacing them with slightly modified versions. Google responded to the president's original accusation, saying, when users type queries into the Google search bar, our goal is to make sure they receive the most relevant answers in a matter of seconds. Search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results toward any political ideology. To discuss, we have Kate Mitchell, co-founder of Scale Venture Partners. Prior to that, she was chair and board member of the National Venture Capital Association. Also with us, we've got Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, who covers Google and got a big wake-up call this morning. And in D.C., we have Ben Brody standing by, who covers tech lobbying for us. So, Ben, I want to start with you. Let's be fair and balanced here. Does the president have a point?
He might have a little bit of a point in that some of the new conservative sites farther out on the right, more conspiracy-minded, probably aren't showing up very much in Google search results. Beyond that, Fox News, which of course he loves and watches religiously, comes up all the time. And you know, we here in D.C., we hear this from politicians all the time. You know, you only write the bad things. And the answer is that that's kind of what the news media does. It's a common critique, and it's something we hear a lot from the president.
Mark, what's been the response from Google?
Nothing beyond the statement this morning. I think, you know, talking to some folks there that claim just that this is outrageous, right? That the idea that Google does this intentionally. They dealt with this 2 years ago with the notion that they were suppressing negative search results about Hillary Clinton, and they didn't come out, I think, at that time with a full-throated endorsement, but certainly privately they've said that. You know, part of the issue here is that Google for 20 years has been pretty secretive about its algorithm and hasn't shared a lot of details, and so that can flame these sort of conspiracy theories. And to Ben's point, they have, like Facebook and Twitter, done a lot this past year dealing with criticism in the other direction, that they surface news disinformation, and so they've tended to weed out a lot of sites both on the right and the left, but predominantly on the right, and that's what sort of led to this moment.
Kate, you've spent a lot of time in Washington. What do you make of the fact that, you know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they are all under attack by the president? I mean, do you think they actually have something to worry about?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, they're big platforms. They become big companies. And when you look at the top largest companies on the planet, a lot of them come out of Silicon Valley. So, of course, they're going to be in Trump's crosshairs. And particularly for someone who cares about coverage, these are now communications platforms. And so he's going to hear and read about himself and the people he cares about all the time. I do think they have something to potentially be worried about or involved in. You see them starting to take a much bigger role in Washington. They all have large offices, as we know, and starting to have more communications. More senior people will be showing up there next week to talk to the Senate Intel Committee on the broader issue of Russian meddling in the election and how we prevent it going forward. So I don't know that you know, worry about it. I certainly everyone worries about overregulation, but I think they can't avoid, as you point out, Mark, being a, you know, something that needs to be discussed when we talk about communications, and is it fair and equal?
Ben, White House advisor Larry Kudlow said they're taking a look at Google. This is at the same time that Google is exploring expanding back into China with a censored search engine. What could the government actually do here?
In terms of news, there may not be a lot that the government can do. There is a liability shield that internet sites enjoy for third-party content. And if you were to cut into that, Google would probably face a lot of libel suits and things like that. I have not seen a lot of appetite to do that in Congress. I've heard a lot of threats. I have not otherwise heard a lot of appetite. The Federal Communications Commission might also have a little bit of a nexus here, but again, they just have shown no appetite generally to do this sorts of thing. What I would be looking at is whether or not the government can do things on privacy, or as Kate said, Russian election meddling that would otherwise hurt the company. Now, whether that's for coverage of Trump or something else, I think that's what they're looking over their shoulder for right now.
To that point, Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and perhaps someone from Google, we don't know yet, will be testifying before Congress next week. Google has said they would send Kent Walker. Congress has said that's not good.
It's not adequate enough, yeah. And just our reporters this morning spoke to Senator Burr, chairs the committee, and some other senators, both in the Republican and Democrat, that said they want the CEO, they want Sundar Pichai, but they're not going, as far as we know right now, they're not going to subpoena Sundar to arrive.
Why not?
Why not the Senate subpoena? I don't know. I've heard some theory.
Why wouldn't Google say
Why wouldn't Google say Sundar? Google's former CEO, Eric Schmidt, loved this kind of stuff, right? This is what he was. He loved getting in front. He was partly the CEO and chairman to do that so the founders didn't have to. I'd say Sundar is much more in the mold of the Google founders, right? He is a product guy. He's in engineering. He loves being up in front of the company. He loves being at the developer conferences. He does not love addressing politics and certainly doesn't love sitting in front and being grilled by senators.
Kate, is Google making a mistake by not sending their top executive?
You know, I think they're missing an opportunity. I think Sundar's an incredible communicator and can be. And I think part of it is, that seriousness that now Facebook and Twitter are showing, I think is well received in Washington. I think it's well received by the public, because remember, we're part of the audience here too. So I think it is a missed opportunity. One of the challenges for all these companies is, data's been one of their biggest assets. Their algorithms are one of their biggest assets. So they should be also playing a role from a shareholder point of view, and also perhaps making sure they're in the conversation to defend part of their assets that are so important while being responsive to the public. And I think not having somebody senior there makes their voice have less clout in the middle of this conversation.
Let's take a look at the market reaction here, because you have companies like Apple and Amazon continuing to hit new highs. Facebook, meantime, really got punished after their latest results. We're also seeing Alphabet not quite keep up.
Right.
I mean, do you think that that is a result of all of these controversies?
Well, Facebook, clearly, because part of their issues with their users were the impact of GDPR, the privacy rules in Europe that reduced, if you have to authorize and sign on, and allow your data to be used or not in different ways, you end up with fewer subscribers, which is what Facebook saw, and that drove some of their results in last quarter. So I think that's been a direct connection between what can happen with regulatory body and what happens with valuations. So it's quite direct in that case.
Ben, how can we expect these hearings to proceed next week? What are Democrats saying about the latest Tech DC kerfuffle?
Absolutely. I mean, as Mark said, they're pretty annoyed that Google wants to send Kent Walker. I think what they're going to drill down on is the November elections. Is going to say, are Google, Facebook, and Twitter really doing their part? As far as they can control things, are we ready for these elections? Are they identifying foreign actors fast enough? Does it go beyond Russia? Are they doing their part? What I think is very interesting is that I think Jack Dorsey, when he testifies over in the House on the same day, is going to face a lot of these questions about anti-conservative bias that today we're asking about Google.
Well, and people on the left have at times the same criticism of these social media companies. I mean, they really are in a difficult position. And also, do we want them to be making these decisions?
I think it's always scary when you allow any human beings, any of us, to make decisions whose decisions are we going to make? I think the thing that certainly Facebook and Twitter have been doing, Microsoft, FireEye, you're going to be talking to the CEO later, which will be exciting because they played such a big role here, is they are becoming more transparent. There are conversations, and I think Senator Warner's proposals will be discussed next week, things like labeling bots, labeling where your source of information is, just like when you read a paper, it's really great to know who the byline is from, whether it's opinion or fact. I think all that's really important. So I think there's going to be a very different conversation as we go forward, and you're right, both sides care about this.
Right. To Ben's point earlier, though, I think the major issue is how liable they are for that content. I think we can play a drinking game next week for the congressional hearings about how many times they'll say we're a platform, right? But these, Facebook and Google in particular, have benefited from these massive media businesses where they are collecting advertising revenue based on content they are not responsible for hosting, and that's just been doing that for years, and they dominate the industry, and they've depleted publishing in large part. So I think the sympathy is sort of running thin.
They've certainly made a lot of money off this business model. Okay, Mark Bergen, Ben Brody of Bloomberg News, Kate Mitchell, Scale Venture Partners. Great to have you back here, Kate, on the show.
Good to see you.
Sticking with Google, at least 13 NGOs, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have signed an open letter asking Google to not provide China with a censored search engine. The letter says that if it does go ahead with its China plan, that, quote, there is a high risk that the company would be directly contributing to or complicit in human rights violations. Google has a responsibility to respect human rights that exists independently of a state's ability or willingness to fulfill its own human rights obligations. Coming up, last week, Facebook, Google, and Twitter all took down Iranian government-backed accounts meant to influence global affairs. The company they have to thank for that is FireEye. Our conversation with CEO Kevin Mandia is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. It began last week with the news that Facebook had shut down 652 Iranian and Russian-backed accounts, trying to spread global misinformation. Then it was Twitter and Google's turn, taking action against 284 and 52 accounts on their respective social platforms. And it provoked the following reaction from Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg.
Security is not something that you ever fully solve. Our adversaries are sophisticated and well-funded, and we have to constantly keep improving to stay ahead. But the shift we've made from reactive to proactive detection is a big change, and it's going to make Facebook safer for everyone over time.
One of the companies helping to make sites safer is FireEye. In fact, it's thanks to FireEye's warning that Facebook and Google spotted those disinformation campaigns. Joining me now to discuss just how FireEye brought all of this to light, CEO Kevin Mandia. So, Kevin, what was it that tipped you off that it was Russia and Iran as well?
Well, it was actually kind of interesting. First off, you get a sense for these sort of things. You know, a couple decades of responding to cyber attacks. You start learning the tradecraft of the adversary, and a lot of times there's a direct link between folks who are doing cyber attacks, breaking in the networks, and folks that are doing information operations. You can't really separate them. Sometimes maybe they're just walking down the hall and talking to each other. But when I talked to the analysts that found this, a lot of it was luck, and a lot of it was just their unique training and their experience. You know, they started pulling a thread on a Twitter account that just didn't seem right. It was pro-Iranian, it was anti-Saudi, yet the character behind the account just didn't feel right. It felt more like a state-sponsored account. As you pull the threads, more things emerged, and we landed with at least the lowest bounds of multiple sites and accounts.
Right, you're talking about the lowest bounds
exactly
here.
Right.
What else could there be? I mean, we have to believe there are other countries doing this as well.
I think so. I think we're at, and one of the reasons we do all these information operations, trying to find them, is it's tangential to protecting our customers, but also the rules haven't settled yet. Nobody knows what's fair game. As I travel the world and meet other, departments of defense and other government officials, everybody's thinking, what is a government's role on offense? What is a government's role in the information space? What's fair game, what's not? And as we're setting the rules, we feel, let's find where there's disingenuous sites, where there's not authentic news, and point it out to folks.
So do you believe these threats could be originating from other countries as well? Could North Korea or China be doing the same? What are you seeing? What kind of evidence have you seen to support that?
Well, if we see evidence, we'll tell folks. But at the end of the day, it stretches credulity to think it won't happen. The information space is just another tool governments are going to use to promote their agenda.
We had Microsoft President Brad Smith on the show last week. They also identified several web pages that were operated by a group tied to the Russian military. They took control of those web pages. Take a listen to what Brad Smith had to say.
What we're seeing now is a pattern that in many respects is similar to what we saw in the United States in 2016 when certain campaigns and political parties were attacked. It is similar to the pattern that we saw in France in 2017 when we really saw every major candidate for the French presidency targeted. We're seeing it again.
Would you agree with that?
I think it makes sense. I think if you're a political official, I think if you're wealthy, if you're influential, if you have power, you'll always be targeted by a criminal element or potentially for espionage purposes.
So what would you say is the extent of these disinformation campaigns? How difficult is this to actually stop?
Well, I think it's very difficult to stop. I think it's going to take zone defense by many different folks, and that's why it's good we're talking about it, today on Bloomberg. Is the more people that are aware of it, the more people will spot it. It is easier for the folks who are trying to be divisive, to spread fake news, to do that than it is to sometimes catch it. So we'll take group defense, zone defense. We're out there looking for it. If we can see it and it's organized, we hope to make a difference.
So what should we be looking for? I mean, my inbox fills with spam every day. I
got it.
Hundreds of Twitter messages that are fake or seem suspect.
Well, I think everybody can play their role in it. Give certain credibility to certain things and maybe less credibility to others. I think in general, most people don't want to be surrounded by lies. They want to be surrounded by truth. And when you see sites going up purporting to be news sites, but it's disingenuous and not authentic, I think you have a right to know about it.
At the same time, when you have a president who says that Google is completely biased, Facebook and Twitter also biased, does that run contrary to what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if I have an opinion on that one way or another. I can tell you that what we're trying to accomplish is just, we're protecting our customers the best way we can. And we have found that direct link between geopolitics and cyber attacks. And we just need to be informed about both sides.
Now, FireEye, as I understand it, was recently engaged by Google to detect breaches. Tell us about that.
Well, I don't know if they were recently engaged or not. I can just tell you we have thousands of customers that want our threat intelligence, that rely on it to kind of come up with their own risk profile. Is our industry at risk more today than yesterday? So that's probably all I'd tell you is there's a lot of companies that rely on our intel.
So what can you tell us in general about how much you've been approached by potentially new businesses in this new threat landscape, now that we are more aware of what is out there?
I think almost every business wants threat intelligence because what we can't be, I'm a cybersecurity expert, but I don't work on the front lines of industrial control system network. We need to get the intel out to every single entity so they can assess the risk to their industry based on their business, based on what they know about geopolitics, and based on their current security platform. So the bottom line is we promote the intel to folks so they can assess their own risk and better safeguard their own networks.
Do you think it's too late to save the midterm elections or protect them completely?
I've never been, I'm speaking more as just a layperson now than a cyber expert. It's real hard to judge how the hearts and minds of people are won or altered by fake news or from anonymous people.
Why is this so hard to stop?
I think the platforms, the anonymity of the internet makes it really hard. You can sit 10,000 miles away and say you're from Ohio or say you're from Texas, and no one can tell the difference.
Do you think these companies have a bigger responsibility that they have not been living up to? I mean, the fact that you tipped off Facebook, but Facebook couldn't see that for themselves, isn't that a little bit concerning?
Well, I think they might have been able to see it for themselves. I don't know what their internal policies are, but I can tell you this. Policing a platform of hundreds of millions of people worldwide would be a very complex challenge to do.
So going forward, obviously there's a lot of opportunities for FireEye and cybersecurity companies out there. What are the opportunities that you're looking at to expand your business?
Well, I think, we have the spokes, we have the brain. What we always are trying to do is better protect our customers by having real-time detection on every device everywhere and being able to give context. One of the things that separates FireEye from a lot of other companies is we believe attribution matters. Like who tried to hack you or who did hack you really does matter. That's the only way you can play a role in some of the more global policies. What are we going to allow people to do and not allow people to do? What are the acceptable behaviors?
What about M&A?
We're always going to be mindful about that. We're on a mission to safeguard our customers. There are a lot of startups that are doing a lot of good work. We'll keep our eye on those.
So what kind of work are you going to be doing over the next few weeks leading into the midterm elections? What, are your analysts on high alert?
I think so. I think there's always events that put you on high alert. Even the Oscars can put you on high alert. So there's different worldwide events, the Olympics, U.S. elections, other nations that hold elections. You kind of, I call it shields up, the old Star Trek term. You got to go into shields up. You got to be a little more wary, a little more diligent. And every single person involved in cybersecurity in any election system is going to be on high alert.
All right, Kevin Mandia, CEO of FireEye, thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll be watching to see if you have any new information in the coming weeks. Coming up, 2018 has been a tough year for social media security, as we've been discussing, and now Instagram is taking new steps to become more secure. What the Facebook-owned app has planned next, this is Bloomberg. China's restaurant review and delivery giant Meituan-Dianping is now gauging investor demand for an IPO in Hong Kong. Bloomberg has learned that a stock offering could raise more than $4 billion at a valuation of up to $55 billion. Meituan is backed by Tencent. Chile is set to become the latest country to tax services from companies like Netflix, Airbnb, and Spotify as it looks to adapt to the changing world of online digital platforms. The proposal was presented last week and aims to level the playing field between online services and more traditional businesses like hotels, music stores, and cable television. It also aims to compensate for tax cuts announced at the same time. And Instagram has announced it will now offer users the option of using more secure third-party authentication apps to log in. This comes after Instagram users were reporting they were being hacked only to discover their account credentials had been replaced with Russian email addresses. Instagram co-founder Mike Krieger says, "We know we have a lot more work to do to keep bad actors off Instagram, and we are committed to continuing to build more tools to do just that." Coming up, stocks are hitting record new levels, but is big tech benefiting from the most recent rally? We're going to discuss next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Back to our top story. President Trump lashing out at Google, claiming the search engine is censoring its search results when it comes to positive Trump news, and promising to take action against Google. The president made the claim after 5 a.m. Eastern time without presenting any evidence to back it up, and prompted a response from Google saying, quote, "Search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results toward any political ideology." Still, Bloomberg opinion columnist Shira Ovide warns his threat to take action should be taken seriously, and joins us now from New York. Shira, what could the president or the White House actually do here?
Well, it's not really clear, right? We heard Larry Kudlow, the White House economic advisor, say that the White House was looking into whether to regulate Google search. I'm not really sure what that means. Maybe he didn't know what it means. But we have seen lawmakers already in Congress talk about maybe cracking down on a provision of the law that shields Google and other internet companies from legal responsibility for what their users post on places like YouTube or Facebook. That would be a pretty real threat to the internet companies, but it's not clear that that's exactly what the White House has in mind.
So you go so far as to say that Trump's claim is bogus. You say Trump is wrong on the facts. Why?
Well, look, I think there are definitely legitimate concerns by all political stripes that Google and Facebook both have bias in their algorithms. Those are the computer systems that determine what 10 blue links we see highest on Google or what posts we see at the top of our news feed on Facebook. But I just don't think the president is wrong that that bias is evident in the news results about him, that what he's reacting to is he believes legitimate news stories about him from CNN or other outlets he doesn't like are illegitimate and signs of bias, and I would call them useful pieces of information.
So, Shira, this is coming ahead of next week. Facebook and Twitter, at least, testifying in Washington. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg will be there. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. Google, interestingly, offered to send its top legal person, Kent Walker, and the Congress has said that's not good enough. But Google hasn't offered up anybody else. Is that a mistake?
It is a mistake because it becomes a news story, right, that it looks like Google is avoiding Congress or trying to evade responsibility for its actions. But it's also a little bit of a no-win scenario for these tech companies, as it was perhaps with the banks 10 years ago in the wake of the financial crisis, when they were the ones that were called to testify in Congress seemingly every other day, right? So, these congressional hearings, they tend to be grandstanding, particularly on issues of kind of internet censorship, as we've seen recently. And there's not going to be a lot of useful information gleaned out of these hearings. So I can understand why the tech companies don't want to send their most senior figures. But yeah, it does look bad if you're not sending the people that members of Congress want to speak to.
All right. Well, Bloomberg Tech will be there, of course, covering every minute. Bloomberg's Shira Ovide, thanks so much for weighing in with your opinion today. Well, after some fits and starts through 2018, U.S. stocks are trading near all-time highs, with the S&P 500 trading above 2,900 for the first time ever. How does tech's performance fit into the broader markets? Michael Purvis, chief global strategist at Weeden & Co., gave this bullish outlook.
Why has FANG and tech and the NDX, for that matter, been such great stellar outperformers? It's because they've been giving great stellar earnings outperformance, and it's earnings growth that has been consistent.
Joining us to discuss where things go from here, we're joined by Cole Smead, Managing Director of Smead Capital Management, and Romain Bostic, Bloomberg TV's markets editor. So, Romain, I'll start with you. Give us a rundown. We've seen Apple and Amazon take off, Facebook and Alphabet, not so much lately. How are you seeing tech's performance fitting in to this broader market?
Well, it's interesting. Michael Purvis mentioned EPS, but I think a lot of it really is more the revenue growth. And you think about the performance of tech. It's still up year to date. It's the best performing sector year to date. And of course, it was the leader in the first few months of the year. It kind of fell out of favor in June and July. But if you look at the data from August, it's actually back on top. Again, best performing, up about 6% when you're measuring the sectors in the S&P 500, and a lot of that had to do with the recent earnings season and really the revenue growth and the revenue forecast that these companies gave. Again, if you are a major investor looking for the safest sectors to be in, it was technology and pretty much these sort of best-of-breed technology companies, the really large cap names that offered you a good return and a relative degree of safety.
Cole, do you think bullish sentiment will continue into the fall?
How this all plays out going over the next 6 months is really tough to guess. But let me follow on what Romain just said. This is all about revenue growth. I'll give you a little statistic. If you look at companies that grow 10% or more revenue per year, there's 15% of the total U.S. market that's doing that. Only 3% in Europe. In other words, this revenue growth mania, or what we'll call a financial euphoria, the idea that as long as you grow revenue, all the investors will come your way and everything will work out fine, just looks incredibly problematic, particularly because this is the epicenter of that in the world. So, when will this end? That's the tough question to ask. Will it be troubling? It looks mightily troubling from our seat.
So why?
Just because of price. In other words, economics are led by the fact that someone has to produce a profit. Everything's profit-seeking in capitalism at the end of the day. We live in Seattle. We kind of joke that we're sleepless in Seattle. Here we sit 10 blocks from a company that does nothing but tries to grow revenue and market share, and then uses things like TAM or the future value of a customer in perpetuity.
You're talking about Amazon, right?
Correct, yeah. But I bring that up because this is not just an Amazon conversation. Shira was talking earlier about the Google and the Facebook advertising model. Judge Judy does a better job of reaching advertisers in one show than YouTube does in a month, because they call reach 1 minute, Google calls it 1 second, as an example.
Romain, is that fair, given that Facebook and Google completely dominate the online ad market, which, speaking of TAM, is growing?
It is growing. I mean, Cole certainly has a point there about just how they measure their value and how they measure their growth. And there's certainly an argument to be made that some of those measurements can sort of be picked apart. I guess, though, that, when I look at it from a market perspective, you tend to look at where the crowd is going. This is one of the most crowded trades when you look at the large cap tech names, the FANGs, if you will, and even some of the FANG adjacent names. But think about the hedge funds reports that we just got, showing that in the second quarter, on an aggregate basis, hedge funds actually did reduce their exposure to tech as a whole. Now, if you break that down into just the large cap names, they actually increased their exposure to those names, the Apples and the Amazons and those types of folks. So there certainly is a sort of, a lot of folks crowded into one small space. And so if Cole is right, if somehow those measures or those metrics get called out or break down in some way, then you could see some trouble ahead. But right now, again, the collective psychology in this market is that that's the safe place to be.
Well, and that said, this has been the story of Amazon from the very beginning, Cole, and Amazon investors have never cared.
Correct. But it doesn't mean the stock hasn't fallen 95% before. That's what it did in the .com fallout. So this idea that because they're so impierceable or impenetrable, that happens in all manias. In other words, people get very short memories. Here we sit in San Francisco. I live in Seattle. These are the epicenters of this conversation. Hosting is a Seattle business. It's not really a South Bay business in comparison. So, if I want to regulate big tech, you could do it through advertising. You do it various ways. If hosting is what I want to regulate, I'll regulate electricity. Why? Because you suck up more electricity on things like Bitcoin or hosting than anything else. So I say that because it all comes down to price. What can investors make for in 10-year returns? Would I rather take the risk on tech, or would I bet that in 2030 we're going to have the most millennials between the age of 30 and 48, and the money I make on those people borrowing money in cars and homes is way easier than trying to figure out if something losing $5 billion in content per year can create something better than Disney.
So are you saying you think Amazon could fall 95%? Are you saying you think we're on the verge of a .com bust, or that could happen again?
Well, let me just give you some circumstance. 72, the Nifty 50 was 50 stocks. 99 was like 75 to 100 stocks. This is narrow, and 15 stocks. It's a 15 stock mania. In other words, if you strip out those 15 stocks, you take out a lot of market cap and enthusiasm. At the same time, it doesn't mean it can't be damaging for equity investors, because the indexes own these things lock, stock, and barrel.
Meantime, Romain, we're seeing a pullback in Asia specifically. Is that something that could spread here?
I think the short answer to that is no. And the main difference is when you look at a lot of the big Chinese tech names, these are companies that pretty much rely on China and the greater China area for their revenue. You compare that to some of the U.S. companies that are much more diversified geographically speaking. So, it's, they're not quite in the same category in terms of the type of customer base that they go after. Also, the Chinese tech names are sort of dealing with some other regulatory issues that are very specific to China that, companies like Apple and Facebook and Twitter and those types of companies aren't necessarily dealing with because they don't have the same presence there. So I don't know if you could compare quite the same, but, when you lump those sort of companies in together, you take the FANGs, you take the BATs, the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and throw them all together. As a group, it's still been a pretty strong year for that group. Obviously, it's been weighted more towards the FANGs, but there are a lot of folks that see that BAT portion of that trade sort of coming back later in the year.
Cole, do you think we should be wary of what's happening in China?
Well, about 40% of the Chinese MSCI indices are tech. We are sitting at 26. If you add back Amazon and Netflix, you get to 30. So the biggest opportunity in stock picking are in the markets that are most saturated with tech, because to own other things that would drive the market in a 10-year period, let's just say where returns aren't as good for the indexes, could be attractive. That being said, as an index investor, you can't go away from that. As stock pickers, that's kind of our opportunity.
What about crypto?
Crypto, I'll use back to my electricity comment. If you actually could transact the world in crypto, we would have brownouts and blackouts like you can't believe, because as International Payment Settlement Group said, you can't actually do that. There's not enough electricity. So I just try to figure out what's sustainable. People are going to get older. I know that. I can make money on things like that. Are we going to be able to, greatly rechange the payment systems outside of a PayPal or, those kind of phenomena in the next 20 years? That's really tough to figure out.
So you don't have any crypto holdings?
No, and I mean, I'd rather probably go buy gold, to be honest with you. But even then, I think that's stupid too. So.
All right, giving it to us straight. Cole Smead, Smead Capital. Thank you so much for stopping by. Bloomberg's Romain Bostic. Thank you as always. Coming up. Chinese ride-hailing giant Didi Chuxing is having a delete Didi moment after alleged murders and sexual assaults by drivers. We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. China's most popular ride-hailing app is in damage control as thousands of users pledged to delete it after a second woman was murdered, allegedly by a driver, while using its carpooling service. Our Chief North Asia correspondent Steve Engel has more from Hong Kong.
Didi Chuxing is taking fire from many fronts, web users, regulators, and state media in China after a female passenger was allegedly murdered while using the Didi carpooling service Hitch, despite a complaint about the driver from an earlier passenger. Now, this is the second death in 3 months after a flight attendant was allegedly murdered as well in May. Now, thousands of outraged users say they will delete the app, including popular actress Wang Xiaochen, who posted on social media in China to her 9 million followers that she deleted the Didi app. Now, the post received 285,000 likes and more than 40,000 comments. The push in China to get rid of Didi is reminiscent, of course, of the Delete Uber campaign last year in the United States amid a series of scandals and missteps at the American ride-hailing company. Now, this uproar comes at a critical time for Didi Chuxing as China's most valuable startup faces rising competition and as it reportedly considers an IPO and a bigger presence globally. It's still overwhelmingly #1 in the China market with more than 30 million active users daily. The closest rival has just under 1 million, but still, it is a serious black mark and an opening for rivals given the anti-Didi sentiment that's gone viral in China. Didi has apologized, it suspended 2 executives, and has pledged to overhaul its services. Stephen Engel, Bloomberg News, Hong Kong.
Now, China is home to 4 of the world's 10 most valuable startups, according to CB Insights. Goldman Sachs estimates its companies raised about $31 billion in venture capital in the second quarter, beating the U.S. for the first time. This backlash against Didi shows how the combination of sky-high valuations and pressure from investors to produce returns can lead to missteps, undermining public trust at a time when a slowing economy is already fueling middle-class anxiety. So, is China falling out of love with its unicorns? Well, maybe this one. Joining us now, Bloomberg Tech's Selena Wang. So the story is actually, there's much more to it. I mean, first of all, it's not just one woman who was murdered allegedly by a driver, but 2. And also there's reporting that there are, in fact, dozens of sexual assaults and sexual harassment complaints tied to Didi drivers.
Right. This isn't the first time that Hitch has been suspended because of these alleged cases. This is actually the second murder in just a span of a few months. And what's especially concerning about this case is that just a day before the murder happened, another woman had flagged this particular driver to the company, saying that this man had actually followed her after he dropped her off at the place. And furthermore, the victim's friend from this most recent case said that the company had actually been delaying the response to reports that she had made to the service as well. Now, Didi has said that there was an issue on the part of their safety department and they didn't take the correct protocols to follow up with the investigation within 2 hours. And as you mentioned, there have been many other reports against Didi. At least 53 women have been raped or sexually harassed by Didi drivers in the past 4 years. That's according to Southern Weekly. And then Caixin found at least 14 rape cases involving Didi, citing court documents.
So Didi had implemented some new rules, including that drivers of the opposite sex drivers couldn't pick up passengers of the opposite sex during nighttime hours, which seems a little, it's like a stretch. I mean, seriously? That's the best they can do?
Didi has certainly made some mistakes in terms of their safety measures. And after the first incident earlier this year with the flight attendant, they wanted to protect women from dangerous male drivers. So, as you said, they implemented this rule where during the late hours of the night and early mornings, male drivers cannot pick up female passengers. Now, obviously, that caused a total uproar of criticism that not only is that very discriminating against women, it's also inconvenient for women because most drivers are men. But they are saying that they are trying to put in other safety protocols, including an SOS button, having stronger background checks, all sorts of other rules.
Well, there are more deep-seated problems here because there are comments in the Didi app where, women notice that male drivers would be commenting on their looks.
So they put in this basically comments feature where you could comment on how the passenger was as a rider and sort of rate them, sort of like in the Uber app. Now, the problem was that the male drivers were using it to comment on the appearance of the riders. So they have ultimately disbanded that optionality to comment in that sort of way.
So look, bigger picture here, the Chinese government has actually been very critical of Didi, which, as we know, is unusual coming from the Chinese government itself, which is normally very, more likely to raise these companies up. This at a time when there is a lot of wealth concentrated in a few smaller privately held Chinese tech companies. How do you think Didi can recover from this?
Absolutely. The Chinese government has taken a very strong approach against this. They're saying that Didi has this unshirkable responsibility and that they need to improve. They need to discontinue this app. They need to be in discussions with the government before they can start it up and running again. The government also said it's cracking down on what they call dishonest behavior in the transportation sector. At the same time, Didi is the largest ride-hailing app in the world. It is the most valuable company in China. The second largest competitor is a tiny, tiny fraction of the company. So it's unclear whether or not this is really going to hurt their bottom line, and even if a lot of high-profile deletions are going to cause really any sizable impact on its user base.
All right. Well, I know you'll keep us posted. Bloomberg Tech Selena Wang, thanks so much for weighing in. Much more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Sears stock got a big boost on Tuesday's session. The struggling retailer and Amazon have expanded a tire purchase and installation program. It's now available nationwide. Customers who buy tires on Amazon can get them installed and balanced at Sears auto centers. And Amazon is looking for ways to ramp up its streaming content. Bloomberg has learned that the tech giant has discussed co-financing movies with at least 2 major Hollywood studios in exchange for certain online rights, including Sony's studio division and Viacom's Paramount Pictures. Joining us now with more, Bloomberg's Anusha Sakui. Anusha, it's no secret that Amazon has struggled with its studio and certainly the leadership of its studio. What can you tell us about these possible new arrangements?
So what me and my colleague Lucas Shaw have picked up on here in LA is some early exploratory talks that Amazon is having with 2 studios at least, the sort of major studios, Sony Pictures and Paramount, which is part of Viacom. Both are the sort of smaller of the big 6 here in Hollywood, and they're the ones that still take on co-financing partners. The likes of Disney don't. So what we understand is Amazon has had some conversations with them to explore what they can do to get maybe more and bigger, more exciting films out to their users. And one way that is, that they might do that is by co-financing films, taking a stake in some of those, potential hits.
So talk to us about the finances of this. How big a deal would it be for a Sony or a Paramount to give up certain online rights to Amazon, or is it all about extra exposure?
Well, you know, it's a trade-off for a film studio, and this is why some studios do it and why some don't. Someone like Sony would have to give up any potential gains from a film. So say, for example, you sell 25% of the film to Amazon, you manage to spread the risk if it's a bomb, but if it's a hit, it means you get 25% less of the profits. Now, that means that, you know, that's something that potentially Sony can't avoid or Paramount can't avoid because they need funds. And so on the positive side, it would be a boost to those studios. It means that they could get more of the content that's out there, more of the exciting IP that's up for grabs, and compete better with the likes of Warner Brothers and Disney and Universal. Now both of those, Sony and Paramount, rank, you know, 5th and 6th. So they could do with any help really to kind of get more of that box office share.
Amazon has had some moderate success with its content, but certainly nothing on the scale of Netflix. You know, how much does this have to do with the fact that Amazon may be struggling to produce its own hit content?
Well, one of the cautionary points that's made to us from our sources is that, you know, this is still early days in these conversations because, you know, the studios do have output deals already with the likes of Stars and Epics. However, Amazon, you know, it is, as you're saying, you know, going through some changes. It still needs to find some direction in its film unit, and this would probably be part of that. They did have great recognition at the Oscars for films like Manchester by the Sea, but, you know, no Game of Thrones type TV show, no, you know, a big award-winning film that, you know, is seen by a lot of people that people really like. I mean, Netflix, for example, has the Disney Star Wars films. So while that deal might be tailing off, you know, Amazon doesn't really have anything to compare.
Okay. Bloomberg's Anusha Sakui for us down in LA. I know you'll continue to keep us posted on any updates. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang from San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.